I got into disc golf like a lot of you as an adult, and I'm sure just like me, you went right online to look for tips on how to throw farther. Now in doing that, one thing that I heard over and over and over again was that in disc golf, throwing far is all about form. I kind of took that for granted for a while, and even though I think the skill of throwing a disc, aka form, is super important, I do think that there's something that's been overlooked by the majority of people, or maybe everybody, who's talking about throwing a disc far online. Now let me preface this video by saying this. Number one, I'm not a disc golf coach or form coach, and I don't want to be. Number two, I'm not a physical trainer. Number three, I'm just a pro YouTuber and a semi-pro disc golfer who started playing just under 2 years ago and is trying to get a tour card and become a real pro disc golfer. So everything that I'm going to say in this video is going to be based on my small obsession that I've had over the last 3 to 4 months about this topic, some conversations that I've had with licensed athletic trainers, and a lot of internet research, not real research. Now, all that being said, today I want to talk about the physical, athletic, and functional mobility side of our sport. This video is going to be broken down into 3 main sections with some subsections in each of them. The first of all being my philosophy around this concept that we're talking about, disc golf being an athletic sport. Number 2 is the details of the muscle complexes, the 5 main ones that I think we're going to need to focus on, with some potential exercises that I think will help you throw farther or at least unlock the potential to do so. And third is a warning about the potential harms with this, and in my opinion, the ways that you need to do this if you want to do it well. When I said earlier that I heard over and over and over again that the throw is just form, I think that really discounts that form is an athletic movement. There's mountains back there, I promise. I think as disc golf evolves, this will become more emphasized as players take this side of the game a little bit more seriously. And so as someone who wants to get to the top of the game but is starting when I'm older, I'm 25 now, I want to stay ahead of that curve. Now the way that I understand form can be summed up in 2 words, position and timing. It's all about getting into the right positions at the right times. Form stuff and form content online, a lot of mine as well, is about the timing side of things, not necessarily the positions. I think this is for a good reason. Timing, arguably, is the most important part of your form. And most people are not athletic trainers. And so I'm even talking a little bit outside of my league right here, which is why there's a lot of caveats to this video. Now, positions and timing, I think affects both the backhand and the forehand, but today we're mostly gonna be focusing on the backhand, a little touching on the forehand as well, because that's mostly what I'm working on right now. And one of the reasons why I think most content focuses on timing over positions is that the position side of things can get taken for granted, especially for people who start playing disc golf earlier in life, as kids. Honestly, you just gotta throw just to stay warm out here. It's 35 degrees. Bye-bye phone. I love a glitch. It works. I was testing out a form thing that I think I'm gonna make videos on soon. Didn't look pretty, but it did what I wanted it to do. Now, when I say later in life, referring to myself and probably a lot of you guys who started playing disc golf, I mean after puberty and having sedentary lifestyle, especially after college, you have a job, you don't move around as much, and you're post-puberty, so your body isn't going to be changing again and needs to maintain its childlike mobility. Or you can be younger and have had injuries that affect your mobility, which is gonna be a key word today. Now, importantly, I say mobility instead of flexibility because to me, mobility is functional flexibility. With flexibility, you increase the range of motion and you can get into that range of motion. Mobility to me means having strength at all points during that range of motion. Now, what's important about this is what you don't use, you'll end up losing. This is why I see basically everybody who's on the Disc Golf Pro Tour right now started playing disc golf when they were younger. Now, I obviously don't necessarily think this is a prerequisite as somebody who's trying to make it to the Disc Golf Pro Tour starting later in life. And this is why I think this topic can be taken for granted by pros and therefore by a lot of coaches who use pros as their examples and who also work with the pros. This is because when you're young, you have a lot of flexibility and mobility. You have a lot of range of motion because you're constantly moving. Sometimes you can get sedentary and not all people are like this, but if you're an athletic child, you haven't lost mobility yet, you start playing disc golf, you're able to get into all the ranges of motion that you need to get into, and then you just continue playing disc golf. So you never lose that because you're continuing to use it. All this to say, today we're looking at the positions part of your form. Especially because if you're starting older, which is why I say it's physically impossible for you to throw far, because I know most of my audience is likely starting disc golf later in life, there are literal physical limitations because of mobility that you don't have anymore, that you see all these young kids coming up with good form, but it's not impossible to get it back. But one more concession about why this is hard to do, especially if you can get into some positions, which is something that I thought I was able to do and then realized technically wasn't. Your body is pretty smart. You likely already understand a decent bit about this concept if you think about throwing nose up and how a lot of people, when they're talking about form work, which this is a little bit positions for sure, they talk about how if you reach back high and you pull through down here and you're like throwing it out, your body's not gonna let you just throw it into the ground. So when you reach back high, it's going to force you, it knows you wanna throw it forward, it's gonna force you to throw it up and do a little air bounce. In a very similar way, and probably more importantly than you wanting to throw it as forward, your body doesn't want you to hurt yourself. This was a little bit of a breakthrough understanding for me because I was semi-confused why I could get into some of the positions that I saw pros doing, where Gannon has told me over and over again, you might have seen some videos about it, you want your wrist to be below your elbow during your throw. And I was a bit confused because I was like here, I can get myself to here, but I was like raising my shoulder complex, I was compensating a little bit to get to that position, or maybe I can get there, but I was really strained to do it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can get in those positions to throw. Your body doesn't want to injure you. So if you're able to get into there, but you're straining to do it, when you speed up, your body's gonna compensate, because if you're throwing a disc 40, 50 miles an hour and you do that same movement that you're straining to get into, you're liable to tear something. And your body isn't gonna let you do that. And because of all of this, in order to be able to throw slow as smooth and smooth as far, and to be loose while you're doing it, your loose positions for you need to be at or beyond the range of motion that you need in every single position of the throw, which you likely don't have if you started later in life and were sedentary, similar to me, who I used to not be able to internally rotate down to here. I'll show you on the screen like what it looked like, and I did it up against Cole Redallen. If you go up to a wall and you put your hand up, you'll be able to see how much you can internally rotate before your shoulder comes off the wall and you move your shoulder complex. That's something I intentionally worked on to get into a good power pocket position, because I was like here when I was rested. And so now if I'm here, then my body can get to here and it's very loose and smooth. And the more internally rotated you can get, the more internally, we'll talk about all these things in the next part. But if you can't have no strain while you're doing those movements at slow speeds, or in those positions at slow speeds or no speed, your body's not gonna let you do it at a higher speed. And the last major point of this is about injury prevention, which is obviously on this tangent, but also consistency. And those two things are why I say you might need a little more range of motion and mobility in these areas, range of motion with strength, than is required to throw, for two reasons. One is consistency. If I need to get into this position to throw, and I can only get here, I'm consistently probably gonna be getting here or here a little bit more. And my body's gonna have to compensate in other ways, like air bounce, to throw the disc flat, or to throw the disc straight in front of me. Whereas if I'm able to get here, where I can open up and throw the disc nose down, pour the coffee, however you wanna think about it, externally rotate your shoulder, supinate your wrist, if instead of here, which means I can kind of consistently get to here, I'm able to work more, and instead of having to strain, I'm able to get down to here more just by having that range of motion and mobility in my shoulder. Then now I can consistently kind of be here. And that means that I'm less prone to injury, because the less percentage of the range of motion that you need to use, the more like external factors can affect your throw, like slipping. And if you don't have the same range of motion in your hip to account for that, you're likely to injure yourself more so than somebody who has more range of motion than they're using, so that they slip, there's external factors, but it's okay because they can absorb it because they've trained that mobility, or maybe they just have it. So we're gonna be diving into 5 main muscle or body complexes that I think that you need mobility in. Let's get to the gym. I like to start every workout session that I have with either walking backwards on the treadmill or using a weight sled if I'm going to my actual gym that I have, pushing it forward and backwards, just because it's helpful to wake up your body. And it also really affects the first of the 5 body parts that I want to get to, where we're going to discuss not only which body parts I think are important to focus mobility demands on for myself, and then likely for you as well, what are some ways to help the mobility, and then kind of why I think they're important as well. But this is absolutely not going to be a comprehensive video. And honestly, I'm hoping it's more going to spark conversations with the right people who actually have the expertise to push disc golf forward, so that disc golfers as athletes can be taken more seriously at the professional level. But I've also gotten a lot of inputs here, so I'm gonna leave them all linked in the description. The 3 or 4 main ones are really the knees over toes guy, Ben Patrick. You might have seen some of his mobility stuff online, massive inspiration for a lot of things that I think. The injury prevention guy, AKA the Wellness Habit, AKA Josh, my trainer. You've seen him on the channel a little bit before, maybe, but he's my more like direct personal contact of somebody who actually is an expert in this. In disc golf, there's a guy named Jonas Murella, I believe, who he's the coach of Disc Golf Finland, and there's a lot of very specific disc golf things and some drills that I want to implement. Those are my main influences on this, as well as just like a bunch of random people online, I guess. Now I want us to work from the ground up when thinking about the mobility things, mostly just because that's an easy way to think about it. What the heck happened to lights up here? So we're gonna start off talking about the knees. your knees are kind of like the first line of defense in your throw, especially if you think about bracing. When you're throwing at higher speeds, this isn't really a mobility issue, but it is an injury prevention issue, because when I'm wanting to do my run up and throw a far disc, when I brace, you obviously have your ankles, but your knees, they don't like to twist. So we're gonna get into that as we talk about the hips, but there are some things that you can do to just prevent some injury in your knees. You don't really twist your knee very much. It's more so just a forward and backward movement, but there's a lot of muscles that connect into your knee. And there's some exercises and just some things to think about if you've ever thrown a lot and like felt it in your knees, like I have, especially when I'm doing a lot of form work or just like hard throwing sessions. My knees tend to feel a little bit sore either at the end of it or the next day. And there are definitely some injuries that can develop if you don't train your knees properly or at least have good knees. We looked a little at the backhand, but if we look at kind of what it's like to throw a forehand as well, the brace in the knee is a little bit more pronounced because you're going here and then you're really kind of throwing through the ground up into your knee and then rotating into the hips. It's much less rotational force being applied to your knee and much more similar to the force of like running downhill, where you kind of stop into your knee. And because of that, I have a workout complex. Like I said, not all of this, actually none of it, is gonna be super in-depth because I want this to just be a conversation starter or something to spark you thinking and then learning from other people who have degrees or licenses about these things. But here is kind of a 3-part superset that I do once or twice a week, or I try to do, to help prevent injury in my knees and also develop some strength. Big shout out to Knees Over Toes guy for this. But the first exercise in the set of 3 is gonna be called a Poliquin Step Up. I'm gonna snag a dumbbell here, not for weight, though you will progressively overload it using more weight, but more so for my heel. What I'm gonna do is step on this. You can do it without this, whatever you need, but really this is just training this knee to go down. Everything here is relaxed. You touch your heel to the ground, and then you step up. This is gonna be training kind of your VMO, a little bit of your quads, and then just getting your body used to being in a position where your knee is slightly over your toes. The brace into that movement comes through your knee. When you're throwing the backhand, it comes through your knee. You want to strengthen the whole knee capsule. So do that on both sides. Everything that we want to do, all these workouts, ideally wants to be unilateral. So meaning moving one at a time. I'm doing my left and then I do my right. Personally, because of all the bracing and the wear and tear on the knee from that and not training this super well, my right knee is significantly weaker than my left knee. And so this is really important for someone like me to train them both up to be equally strong and then to make them stronger so that I can take more force when I brace and feel more confident about throwing. The second exercise of this 3-step like superset is tibialis raises. So if we go up to a wall, you can get like a bar that works this very intentionally, but in the lower part of your leg, you have a couple muscles. On the front side is your tibialis, and the back side is your calf, obviously. Calf raises, I think, are also important. That's something else that I do, but we're not going over all the exercises that I do or that I have programmed. But you get on the wall, and then you just raise up as high as you can. You'll feel a little bit in your quads just stay flexed, and you're really raising the tibialis here. Strengthening this muscle, which is at the front of your knee, which is kind of the first line of defense for like bracing before you jump. And then if we're not jumping, but we're bracing to put all of our momentum forward in a forehand, or bracing here in a backhand, that can be a helpful tool in giving us healthier knees when we play disc golf. So I tend to try to do with all these higher reps because that is more beneficial for your tendons, because tendons grow slower and they need a lot more blood flow, and higher reps leads to more blood flow. Try to stay in the 12 to 15 rep range. This third exercise though, I don't quite do that high reps. I try to do between the 5 and 8 rep range, and it's definitely the weirdest one out of these 3. I'm gonna actually get under this punching machine. I'm supposed to hit it. Put my heels underneath that, and then it's a Nordic curl, but mostly the eccentrics. So just going down as far as you can, and then letting yourself drop. And then I like to kind of push myself and engage my hamstrings at the back of my knee in order to help. I do like 5 to 8 reps of these in the superset. As you can see, I can't get down really far. It's a very hard movement. It requires a lot of hamstring flexibility and stability, and that's gonna help work the back of your knee from this side. So the one thing that's kind of missing in the superset would be calf raises, because if you do tibialis, calf, hamstring, and quad exercises, which is what all these 4 are for your knees, you're going to be helping all of the muscles that insert into the knee, which is beneficial because it'll help the tendons and make them healthier for longer. Obviously, if you have knee problems, consult a professional before doing anything. All right, we brought it outside and we'll head back to the apartment because most of these things you can actually do inside of your house. There's a couple that you can't really or not as easy. The second main muscle group is gonna be the hips. And honestly, saying hips is a little bit reductive because all of your glutes, your quads, your adductors, your abductors, everything inserts into the hips. There's even more like smaller muscles as well, including back stuff. And I'm definitely not gonna be focusing on all of that because one, I don't know all of that. And two, I don't know what of it is super important for disc golf. But there is one function of the hip that I think is very important that can be trained that I think is an issue for a lot of people, including myself. And most of that is going to be hip internal and external rotation. Now, if you notice, even just me sitting down, I'm externally rotating. My hips are externally rotated. Like typically throughout the day, most people don't have a problem with hip external rotation, at least like not in like the amount that you would need. But hip internal rotation, like no, you don't really sit like a W, you know, like an anime person. Like that's weird. So there are some things to work on it, which I guess we're heading back to the apartment to talk about. Now, first we need to think about why hip internal rotation is important for disc golf, mostly the backhand, also the forehand, but let's look at the backhand as an example. When you throw a backhand and you watch pros throw backhands, their back knee moves towards the ground. And you could think, hey, this is hip internal rotation. And in a way, it probably is, but I think the more important side of internal rotation is actually in your bracing leg. Because when you're standing here and I'm twisting my leg, obviously I'm internally rotating this hip, but when I throw, I'm more bracing into it and it's just kind of what happens to this leg. It's de-weighted at the point where it's actually really the knee is pointing to the ground. The back foot is off the ground. But even in this position, when I'm twisting my back leg, there's only so far that this can go, not even because of this leg, because honestly, like if I rotate my upper body, like this can continue to twist. The limiting factor is actually the internal rotation of this front hip. Because as this moves in, there's only so much rotational force that can be applied to this leg, this is my understanding, before the knee has to open up. Especially when you're going at higher speeds, when you rotate into this leg, you feel it here. Like you feel like, especially if you're keeping this straight and like ahead, you can feel your leg internally rotating in a very similar way, but now it's just more doing an isometric or like static holding pose of internal rotation here. This goes back to the idea of compensation and how much hip internal rotation you actually have, limiting the amount of force that you can actually apply to your brace efficiently that can get transferred into the disc. I think the best example of this is Calvin Heimburg. Or at least he's the example that I notice every single time that I watch him throw. Shout out Disc Golf Van Life. Here's a slow motion of Calvin Heimburg throwing. So you see he hits. This back leg is kind of pointing backwards, and right now all the weight's gonna be transferred here, and he has to resist the rotation of this leg through internally rotating his front hip. If we just press period to go forward frame by frame, his back leg looks like it's de-weighted, and you can see that front leg rotating a little bit. But if you look at how his foot stays planted where it is, well, all that weight is now getting transferred into the disc because instead of opening up and rotating because of a lack of hip internal rotation, instead, all of that weight, all that transfer gets put into the disc. And finally, kind of now, he's starting to open up this foot a little bit. Let's not look at anything else in the form except for that front foot there. So you see, I'm gonna plant, and now I'm kind of opening up, and because I don't have great hip internal rotation, you can see I'm rotating on that brace leg instead of my hip being able to stay internally rotated and transfer the weight into the disc. This is something that I've honestly found a little hard to train since this movement of internal rotation has a decent amount of muscles involved. I've definitely seen some different tips, but one main one that I want to focus on has to do with what I was hoping to be a cable machine in the gym, but instead, it's actually kind of nice. We can do it at home with resistance bands. I'm not going to use a ton of weight, but it's kind of nice. You can just throw this to the hinges. And now we'll have a resistance band coming off of that. What we'll do is actually lay down perpendicular, put this on our foot, and now what we can do is actively, from resistance, internally rotate the hip. We don't want anything to move except for this hip, and we want to, honestly might need a little less weight, internally rotate it. Okay, I keep my heel on the ground and it's definitely regressing the movement, making it a bit easier, but I definitely feel my hip working this internal rotation. I want to keep the knee straight because that's how you want to do it. I also think that doing some form work, working on your brace at very slow speeds will help to do this. Be careful though, because your knee, it's important that you don't hurt your knee. And I think that this is a good way to regress it, that like there's no pain on the knee. We're just focusing on doing as much weight as we can with our hip. It's important to brace. It's important to work on the timing of bracing and actually doing it, but there's a reason why bracing is hard for a lot of people, and it doesn't have anything to do with not trying hard enough. It's that their body mechanics are limited. so we can try to fix it, in my opinion. I don't know if I'm right, but that's my thought. I know I just showed that on my right side, but you want to do everything on both sides, not only to maintain a balanced body, which is important because balance is important in disc golf, but also because a lot of the things that you're doing on one side that you're actively trying to use or actively trying to break with are either the active or breaking movements on the other side of the throw, whether that be forehand or if you throw both ways, lefty and righty, which would be sick. The breaking concept will become a little bit more apparent as we get to some of the other movements that we'll be talking about. Now, the third area, which I think is really important, is about T-spine rotation. I believe there's a couple different types of spines, not types, but like areas. You have your lumbar, your lower spine. I know that you have like your thoracic or maybe your upper spine. Not 100% sure, but this is more so about rotation and like in a movement when you throw a backhand, when you go back, also internal rotation happens when you coil into this back hip because you don't want to open this hip up. You want this hip to internally rotate, absorb the force as you are coiling into your core here. And then also after you coil into your core, you're able to use your rotation of your thoracic spine to reach back out, and then you have opening and thoracic extension. But this is honestly where I'm kind of the least knowledgeable or comfortable talking about stuff because it's still a little bit new to me, especially rotational movements. But there are two movements that I do that can help with the rotation and the actual extension. The first of which, I'm gonna overlay some footage of doing pullovers, where I really try to make sure that I keep my hips down as I bring the weight back behind me on the bench. I position kind of my shoulder blades on the bench area, and that way I'm really opening up my chest, doing some thoracic extension, and then just using those muscles to pull the weight back over top of me. The second thing is cable rotations. It's literally just getting to a cable, lighter weight, but you take the weight and then you basically just do a throw. You just rotate as if you were to throw. You don't really throw it out, but you take the weight, and then it is also helpful because when you have resistance back here, you're able to get into the right positions a little easier, especially if you have trouble like me going forward a little bit too early or having your weight shift a little too forward. This will really help you just to feel some of those positions a little bit better as well. Those are some general thoughts and understandings. Let's move past this a little bit and get into the fourth thing, which I think is really important, which are your shoulders. Now, it's generally my understanding that your shoulders should not have a lot of active movement during the throw, but that doesn't mean that they don't need to have enough strength like in the breaking part of the movement, as well as needing to get into the right positions like we've already mentioned a little bit with internal rotation, aka this position. Instead of this is external rotation, internal rotation of the shoulder itself. Now for the shoulders, there are two main supersets of movements that I do. And most of these are honestly to help strengthen your rotator cuff as it's breaking the throw, but also specifically internal external rotation. I have some weights here. Just do it like a 5-pounder. This movement right here, the internal, it's an external rotation movement, but on the way down, it's a weighted stretch for more internal rotation, range of motion, and then you externally rotate and actively use some of your rear delts and your rotator cuff muscles. That I typically superset with a movement called a trap 3 raise or a Y. Most of the stuff is stuff that I've gotten from Knees Over Toes guy, which really helps to strengthen the lower traps in your mid back. And the second set are the pullovers, which you talked about in talking about thoracic extension, paired with the Powell raise, which works a little bit different parts of your external rotators or your muscles. This works kind of muscles that you can really feel right here-ish. And then the Powell raise will really work muscles that you can kind of feel a little bit higher and a little bit deeper into your shoulder capsule. There's one final movement that I was really hoping to show you in the gym because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to actually do it here, but it is a little weird, but it really helps to open up the chest. I'm gonna show some pictures, some stills from James Proctor, where you can see after they've thrown, they have a lot of range of motion and strength, obviously, in their chest, where they're externally rotating their shoulder, their chest is like wide open. You're like, how do you get to that position? One thing that can help with that is kind of a chest expansion isometric movement paired with some bicep curls, which really gets into the last thing that we need to talk about, which is arguably one of the most important and one of the most injury prone areas of your body in disc golf. And I'll show some footage of what I'm talking about with this movement from the guy that I learned it from or saw it from initially. But essentially you lay with the top of your back on a bench all the way backwards, expand your chest and just hold weights there. And then you take the lighter weights and you do some curls in the bottom range of your bicep, which you don't typically work with a lot of other movements. And that bottom range of movements really seamlessly leads us into the last important body group that we're gonna talk about today. The last major body part that we're gonna be talking about are the elbows. In disc golf right now, your elbows might be hurting you because two reasons. One of them, there might not be strength in a lot of the different insertions into the elbow joint. Secondly, maybe you're not using your shoulder correctly, and similar to you opening up your knee, like me, and because I don't have good hip internal rotation on my brace leg, your body wants to throw the disc in a way that the elbow stays out. It's just basically rotating with it and then opening up. And if you can't have that internal rotation to do that, then you're gonna end up pulling from low to high, and then it's gonna impinge the elbow slightly as you get through the throw, and then you're gonna have to figure out a way to eject the disc out, and that might hurt your elbow a little bit. You might be like me, who for a long time, maybe 6 or 8 months, I was going through some elbow tendinopathy, which is like long-term tendonitis, between golfer and tennis elbow over and over and over again. When I actually fixed my internal rotation through the external rotation movement, as well as just some stretches, which I don't think stretches are bad. Any range of motion that you gain through stretching, it's important to add strength to that range of motion. But similar to your knee, where we talked about all the different muscles that insert into your knee, your elbow also has a bunch of different insertions. They have the forearm flexors, this movement, the extensors, you have the 2 muscles of your biceps, the 3 muscles of your triceps, as well as a brachialis. That is kind of biceps brachialis, maybe that's part of biceps. I don't really know, I'm not that smart about all this stuff. But if your joints' connective muscles are weak, your tendons are gonna be weak. And there are 2 workout complexes I have that can help with this. One of them is above the arm, the other one is below the arm. For the below the arm, the forearm part of this workout, we're gonna actually take 2 different things. One is gonna be a weight, one is gonna be a hammer. I just bought this at Walmart, it's a 2.5 pound hammer. I might need to go up and weight a little bit. But your forearms have a couple different functions. One is obviously kind of doing this movement with your wrist, whether that's getting it higher and you can increase that range of motion, it's getting it lower, and then you also have pronation, that's pronation, good, and supination, I learned finally. And then also kind of side to side. So we want to be able to work all of those parts of these muscles in order to strengthen them so that when we're throwing, we don't have any elbow injuries, and they also will help to increase specifically like forehand flicking movements and probably backhand if you use your wrist at all. So first, we're going to do forearm curls. Rep ranges will depend, but we're just using 5 pounds for now. And then you want to do the opposite side and end up curling up. This is harder for me. Obviously, my extensors, the top side of my forearms, are much weaker than my flexors. After this, we're going to do a couple movements. One of them, we're going to take the hammer and we're going to pronate, kind of get down. I try to increase a little bit of my range of motion here. Don't necessarily know why, but do that and then turn it around. Just doing that movement. The other one, it's a little bit harder. If we take the other side and put it here, then we could try to pronate that way and supinate and whatever, but that one's always harder for some reason. I do both sides of that and then come over, put the hammer at your side, and then we'll go up with it. And this is really working a different set of muscles. And then we'll go to the back side. Obviously with the weight, you can just change the weight, regress the weight. With the hammer, what you can do is actually choke up on it. So if this is too hard for you to do back and forth, then you can regress it to here. And this is a little bit easier. The closer you are to the head, the less leverage you'll need. Sorry, downstairs neighbors, and the better it'll be for you. But just doing this complex and having this by my desk in my office, I don't do it nearly enough. All this stuff is stuff that I don't do nearly enough, but I know is important. But the second thing that is really helpful is above the elbow insertions. For this, I'm also just gonna use the same 5 pound weight and then a band, because typically I'll do this with cables in the gym. This is a 3-part superset, the first of which are Zottman curls. So take the weight, you go up with it the normal way, flip it around, and go down with it this way. Really slow, control the eccentric. This works like your brachialis, which is kind of this muscle right here on your forearm. 1, 2, do that. I try to do these for 12 reps, and then after you do the 12 reps here, both sides, do them at the same time, doesn't really matter. They're still unilateral even if you're doing it at the same time. Then I'll go to tricep extensions, where I'll take the weight overhead. I tend to like doing it as overhead as possible and then really seeing how deep of a range of motion can I get that tricep. So starting to feel stretch down there, go up. I care much less about hypertrophy, I care much less about time under tension, and much more about getting into the deeper ranges of motion and making sure I can get out of them strongly. That's all strengthening through the range of motion is. How deep can you get, and then can you get out of that range of motion using only the muscle that you're trying to target that range of motion with. So 12 of those as well on both sides. Try to get really deep. And then last are gonna be face pulls. We're just gonna go by this leg, because who cares? Face pulls are not necessarily the easiest movement to like do in your house, but if you have like a pull-up bar or something up high, even like I have these connected to the hinges on the doors, you can do that. And then we'll just take this short rubber band, and I like to kind of go on top, like above my head. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. With these, you can, if you want a little bit more resistance, choke up a bit on the bars. And then it's really helping to kind of light up your upper back and working those muscles. And then at the same time, I put this for the elbows and this kind of trifecta here, this is given to me by my buddy Josh. When you get into that end range, there's a little bit of stress on the flexion of your elbow, just from a different position, kind of on the inside here. Now I know this is a super high level overview. Touching on each of these movements for all these body parts is more of an example rather than like what you should be doing. I don't think anyone had quite yet explored like the magnitude of value from form work versus this type of work, which increases range of motion as well as strengthens the movements. And then there's some explosive things as well in my program that I'm doing. So we'll check back in like 3 to 6 months to see how these things are helping and what I think the percentage of like doing actual form work, which is still super important, practicing the skill of disc golf as well as practicing the athleticism that's required for disc golf in a non-disc golf setting. My trainer friend Josh, who I've mentioned a lot in this video, likes the concept of money in the bank, where you don't have to do all these, you don't have to do maybe you don't have to do any of these, but if you want to do any of them, no matter what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, you're putting money in the bank. Doing anything consistently is better than doing everything very inconsistently, like once every month or so. And doing anything at all is better than doing nothing. I'm gonna be honest, I don't see a lot of potential harm here, especially if you're a healthy person. But if you do have nagging injuries or you have health complications, please go and actually visit a health professional. Don't just listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. However, if you do want to do these movements or just work out in general, I think there are 3 key things that you need to keep in mind every time that you do them if you want it to be beneficial for your disc golf game. First is never work through pain. You can regress the range of motion, so lessen the range of motion as much as you possibly need to work without any pain. If you have like nagging pain or injuries, stop and seek actual professional help. Second is to do full range of motion as much as you can every single time. Don't work through pain, but do as much range of motion as you can. And if that means that you have to lessen the weight, definitely do that. This is something I'm having to learn to put aside my ego in the gym. Don't think about what I used to be able to lift in the past. Think about what I can do now with the correct form and range of motion. The weight and range of motion will come if you regress these things correctly and stay with it consistently. And third is to control every rep or own every movement, however you want to think about it. These are the 3 real keys that Josh, the injury prevention guy, he instilled all these in me when we started doing a little bit of work together. And honestly, to me, like the worst case scenario here is I'm completely wrong about this. It doesn't help your disc golf throw. It doesn't help your game. It wouldn't make any sense to me that that's the case, because in every other sport, including golf and other non-as athletic or as demanding sports, they do these things to help them get better, and there are coaches for them at the top of the game. But worst case, I'm completely wrong, and I just have more range of motion, have a little bit more strength, have a healthy habit and lifestyle, and potentially live a little bit longer, and I'm able to move around a little bit easier. Like, that's a trade that I'm willing to make for a few hours every week. I know this video is really different than normal, so thanks for watching and even considering this. For the professional side of our sport, which is only one side, it's not the whole thing, to continue to grow and be pushed forward, I think this is an important conversation to have. I'll see you guys tomorrow with more silly and fun disc reviews, more content like this to come if there is any interest. But I just really appreciate you guys so much for watching and giving me this platform. It means the world. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys tomorrow.